All right. So first and foremost, my name is Vasilios Kosmakos. It is Wednesday, October 3rd, 13th, 10:04 a.m. Who would have the pleasure of speaking to you today?
My name's Tessa Skiles.
Great.
And what was that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
My name's Tessa Skiles. I'm an underwater videographer and photographer. I've been exploring and working to protect Florida Springs for most of my young adult life. I started out with my first conservation video at about 8 years old. My father was a huge influence in my path to becoming a science communicator to protect Florida's fresh waterways. He was also an underwater photographer and videographer and a world-renowned National Geographic explorer and cave diver. Incredibly influential man. And in my mind, I had no choice after being shown these amazing places and watching them degrade right in front of me as I was growing up to fight for them. So that's why I'm here today.
Fantastic. So, kind of going off what you just said, right? Can you describe your career? When did you start? And kind of just give me a little synopsis of kind of what you've been doing so far.
Yeah. So, I guess I really sunk my teeth into my conservation work right out of college, where I spent a few years working with the Florida Springs Institute. I learned a great deal and got to have so many interactions with tons and tons of young, passionate individuals, and started to kind of shape my message around how I wanted to protect the springs and what approach I wanted to use. It's a lot about kind of public perception and what creates the most traction for me. Not long after that, I started getting into documentary filmmaking. I've produced and directed a number of films and interviewed just as many. And my most recent is a docu-series called Fellowship of the Springs, directed by Oscar Herral, which is a wonderful documentary. And yeah, so I for the most part, I've just been involved in digital media content for Springs conservation, and that's kind of where my path has taken me.
Great. So you kind of mentioned earlier, right, that you did see the degradation of some of these water systems, over the course of your lifetime. Would you mind speaking about that a little bit more? So what exactly has changed, and what do you see, is happening here?
So visually, when you go to the springs, compared to back in the, 1960s, 1970s, which of course I wasn't alive. You and I were both not alive yet. But from many accounts, there used to be so much submerged aquatic vegetation, much more wildlife. And these days when we're going to the springs, we tend to see these kind of barren, I hate to say it, but they're wastelands. The water may be clear, it may look clear to you, but the water quality is not there. And the ecosystems are not able to thrive like they used to. And you're seeing less vegetation, you're seeing less turtles, you're seeing less fish, just less topside wildlife altogether too. These ecosystems are starting to collapse with a lack of flow and a lack of water quality.
So would you mind describing what that topside term you just said means?
What do you mean? Yeah. So topside wildlife, meaning birds, gators, snails, all kinds, just all the wildlife you would see above the water too, that is also being supported by that underwater ecosystem.
And additionally, And then
Yeah.
additionally, you kind of mentioned that these springs are, have become barren wastelands, right? So even though they are clear, right, it's like the water quality is degraded. Why do you think that, what has caused that? And, what exactly, what implications does that really have for animals, but obviously people too?
Well, across the board through the Florida Springs region, it's pretty widely accepted and acknowledged that the downfall of our springs is contributed to by herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, and overconsumption of water. We're pulling water out too much, too fast, to where rainwater cannot recharge our aquifer. We're at a net negative. And on top of it, with less water, there's less water moving throughout the aquifer. There's a higher concentration of all of these chemicals, these harsh chemicals that are making their way in to our water supply.
And then, would you mind speaking about the role that agriculture has kind of had, directly kind of leading to this degradation, right? So, is there any specific chemical that you're aware of that's kind of causing this degradation? What changes in maybe agricultural policy do you think have contributed to this kind of destruction?
Okay, well, I'm not an environmental scientist, so take this for what you will. But for example, a spring system that I hold, or a water basin that I hold very near and dear to my heart, is the Santa Fe River and its springs. And the main contributor to its decline in health, the Ginny Springs, the Gilchrist Blue Springs, that region, is glyphosate. It's Roundup. It's freaking Roundup. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what the main contributors are, but as far as the public is concerned. But as far as the science goes, it's a weed killer. And that's just one example. Now, there's certain areas that are being hit by different combinations of things. And of course, water consumption, the over pumping, also contributes to every single one of them. I mean, there isn't a place that we aren't using too much water in the state of Florida, in the Florida Springs region, right? But yeah, that's one example. And what you can see is with glyphosate, you can see the death of all of the plant life. It's an herbicide. It's killing the plants in the water. And none of the critters have any food, right? So the turtles are leaving, and the manatees, they're not being supported. Their diets aren't being supported. The fish have nowhere to hide. There's so many ways in which the vegetation loss impacts that ecosystem. And I remember, just in my short lifetime, I mean, I'm 28 years old. I remember floating down the Santa Fe River, and my feet would always graze the eelgrass. Always. I got used to it too. You go out to the springs and you hear kids screaming across the river, seaweed, right? They're freaking out. I got used to it. I didn't mind it at all, but I still have memories of that sensation. And you go on the Santa Fe River these days, and you don't feel any of that. It's very seldom that you will see any patch of vegetation that's not invasive, that is somehow resilient to glyphosate or these chemicals. And it's quite sad, but when it's allowed, and we have no idea of the schedule of when these chemicals are going onto the grounds at these farms. That's not public information. I think it should be. It should absolutely be public information when these people are putting this on the ground. And sorry, I kind of lost my. I'm keeping an eye on the time. I got 15 minutes here until I have to hop into the car. But excuse me. shoot, I did lose my train of thought. I was talking about when the schedule of the glyphosate working its way onto the ground. Shoot, can you remind me of the question again, please?
Yeah, so I was kind of just asking about agriculture's kind of role, and then you kind of mentioned how these agricultural herbicides have kind of been killing essentially all the plant life in these water systems, and then how it's the direct result of these kind of this runoff contribute that is done by these farms, and then you're kind of talking about how that information should be public because we need to know when this when these herbicides are kind of entering our waterways. That's kind of what you were saying.
Right. Oh, that's right. Thank you. You reminded me of my next point. When there are breaks in the dumping of these harsh chemicals, we can see the plant life bouncing back. And there are certain systems that get less of the chemicals. And when they have the chance to revive themselves, they do at rapid rates. Some plant life and animals come back sooner than others. But it's really amazing when they are allowed the chance to grow, when they're not continuously doused with these chemicals. And it's like seemingly very small traces of chemical that makes a huge impact. And it's quite, it's hard to wrap your head around. But again, as a non-scientist here, this is what I've gathered from listening to all of the information around certain spring systems and that sort of thing. Santa Fe River is just one of my best examples, but yeah.
So would you mind kind of discussing, the direct effects this has in the aquifer, right? So obviously, your father, Wes Skiles, was incredibly famous for kind of helping mapping those kind of systems. And then, I would imagine you kind of have similar experience. But, how does this affect, the water that we don't see, essentially, in those systems that are kind of beyond the human eye?
Flow reduction. In regards to how it's impacting a couple of things: the quality of our water underground, which is our drinking water, which is most important for people who are on wells, right? So the lowering water quality it's not just in the springs, it's also in our drinking water. It's in the aquifer. And we are drinking those chemicals slowly, every single day. And there's no way besides RO to get nitrates out. And I'm not 100% certain on glyphosate and that sort of thing, but I would imagine, again, I'm no scientist, but I would imagine that it's a pretty difficult process of removing such harsh chemicals out of your drinking water. There's been a study showing a link between stomach cancer and prostate cancer to high levels of nitrates. Currently, the drinking water standard here in the state of Florida, for the Florida Department of Health, is 10 parts per million with nitrates. That's fertilizers and that sort of thing. And also fertilizers are able to nitrate is able to flourish in these systems when they don't have other plants to filter it out, right? So it's just skyrocketing. We're seeing higher and higher amounts of nitrates and other chemicals from farming in our drinking water, and that's absolutely terrifying. It's and a lot of people, it's out of sight, out of mind. You can't consistently test those high levels, but when it's being put on, when the chemicals are being put on the ground in a schedule of once every couple weeks or once a month and that sort of thing, you're getting these shocks of this in your chemicals in your drinking water, and it's still going into your body, even though you can't pinpoint when it's happening to you, when it's going to happen. And you may just be feeling a little sick or something like that. You feel a little off. I don't know. But it's terrifying to know that over time it's leading to cancer. And this isn't something that's talked about in Florida. This isn't being talked about. From what I understand, the Department of Health is doing its best to cover it up. And that's terrifying. There's been reports of drinking water that's 60 parts per million with nitrates, and nothing has been done about it. Some bottled water sent to the home that's experiencing that.
And are there specific areas in Florida that are kind of more prone to these issues than others? So, if you aren't getting your water from a well, right? Are you less susceptible? Are farming communities, people that directly kind of live, near these kind of water sources more susceptible? Do you have any information or knowledge about that?
It's been a while since I've looked at the numbers. I'd have to go back and check myself. But last I recall, Union County, this is something that we can, Gilchrist County, this is something that I can go back and look and have when we talk next, if need be. Or you could talk with, I think it's public information still. We'll have to go see how recent the report is, because it may be from 2015, in which case it's going to be the same numbers, and a lot of things have changed since then. And I just wouldn't be comfortable sharing that information because honestly, I have no idea. A lot of this stuff is just, I can recommend a couple of scientists for you to speak to kind of clarify some of this. So it's probably the avenue, if you have the time, that we should take.
Absolutely. That's the point of this project. So
yeah,
that opportunity.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, obviously, down south is going to have, there's mass amounts of pollution in the water down south, a little bit farther down south. The very tip of the Florida Springs region and the Florida aquifer is being heavily hit. It depends, but yeah, there's a huge correlation between heavy ag communities and big ag and these areas that have extremely high nitrates in their water. So you are correct. And the data will support that.
So, kind of going off what you said, right? How has your work kind of changed throughout the years, right? So have some issues become more prevalent than others? And then what general trends have you kind of noticed in the way people have been interpreting these issues?
Well, unfortunately with Nestle coming into the picture, there's been a lot of attention that's been pulled away from water quality and put on water quantity. And both are very important, but the water bottling industry in the state of Florida is frankly the least of our concerns when it comes to the health of our drinking water in the state. And there's been an amazing amount of buzz and public knowledge that has been brought to springs conservation through this battle, but no feasible solutions or action plans to follow up when this permit is finally, it has already been approved. It makes me sad to see that so many people put in the effort to fight this massive corporation. There's so much work put into it, and to just see it all fall through. I think that, and before this, before this all happened, I went into it thinking, I don't think this is going to end well. And I really hope that all these folks don't lose hope, because they're fighting I don't want to say it's the wrong battle, because it's not, because there was so much good that was done around that effort, but they're getting distracted and they're also losing hope because of the loss. And there's so many more areas in education and campaigns and incentives that we can do outside of just battling a big named corporation over one single permit in a system that's not being its main issue isn't even water quantity. I mean, it's part of it, but it that has majorly changed my perspective, and it's actually caused me to take a backseat and watch and learn a lot more about those sort of solutions and incentives and things that will actually gain traction in this effort. And I mean, we're talking about something that's really, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to, between you and I here too. I mean, it's, and I'm sure you know, it's very difficult to figure out and how to convince people outside of the circle to care about conservation. I mean, we're talking about, you know, what works in fighting for climate change too. Like if we had the answer, then we would be so much farther along. And I feel like I've become part of a greater community that's really trying to hone in on communication and science communication and how to work inside of our political systems. It's wearing two hats of working inside the political systems to do the most good that we can in the time being while these resources are still here, and also kind of shaping the message to be productive in a way. So it's majorly opened my eyes, is, you know, I now see the public energy for these issues kind of as a whole and something that needs to be protected and directed, right?
So would you mind kind of elaborating though on what you kind of said about Nestle? So
I don't know if I want to go there.
Okay, yeah.
I would rather, just because I'd rather just put it to rest, you know? I feel like I said the highlights, but I mean, you tell me, I cut you off, you tell me, maybe I'd be willing to answer the question that you have. I mean, we'll see.
So instead of talking about Nestle, right, you kind of mentioned that, you know, it did highlight some kind of, it did kind of highlight some more important issues, right, that need to be addressed, right? So I think, would you mind kind of going into more specificity, whatever the word is, on you know, on what those issues kind of are, and what specific issues we kind of need to tackle, kind of based upon that kind of momentum that we built. You know, what should people do? What should people that fought for against Nestle, you know, do to kind of maintain that hope? You know, to kind of keep pushing things forward.
We need to fight the best available data that's being brought up to our water management districts. There needs to be more funding put into research and fighting these models, because without the data, that what's happening is a lot of these systems are corrupt, and it comes back to our governor and the governing boards of our water management districts. And the way I see it is there's a chokehold being put on to the staff of the water management districts. There's a lot of good folks who are 100% honest and living with integrity and honesty, and but there's people that are also afraid to lose their jobs. Jim Gross is an amazing, the perfect person to talk to about this. And I know he would be more than willing to. He's gone on the record about it a lot. He used to work with DEP, and he was shown the door for being honest about the science. And so what they're trying to do is cover up the real findings here. But there is it costs an immense amount of money to create these studies and put forth this research in lawsuits to fight the quote unquote best available data that the scientists contracted and within the water management districts in the DEP are putting forth in these decisions about permits and withdrawals and water quality and that sort of thing. So that's one thing, is more funding for research to fight this data. Another thing is getting better people on these water management district boards. There shouldn't be a pawn shop owner, and for farmers on a water management district board, of course, the opinion is going to be biased, right? They're going to vote for what helps them. I mean, that's simple greed. Greed needs to be eliminated in these areas to the best of our ability. It's completely natural, as we humans are well aware, but it's taking too much of a front stage in our water management, our natural resource agencies, right? We also, I don't know if you're familiar with the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act. That's a wonderful program that's incentivizing land conservation for plots that create residual income for their owners, right? So these people are still making money off of the land while it is technically being protected. And that's a perfect example of an incentive. These permit holders who are doing so much damage should be responsible, or the government should be incentivizing further conservation and further conservation efforts along with them. So if you're doing this much damage, you should be replacing that with this much good, right? And there should be a standard for that, in my opinion. And that's my top three, really.
So, what would you say? What has been the biggest obstacle in terms of policy that's kind of been implemented within the last several years, and by years I kind of mean decades, right? That you've kind of seen, and then what do you think is the most hopeful kind of thing you've seen, right? So, what are we doing worse in, and what are we doing better in, in terms of policy?
Well, the worst would be what I just mentioned, and that is corruption, right? And that's pretty widely known at this point. You may hop over to my Bluetooth. Just give me a second.
No problem.
So the best in terms of policy, I mean, the Florida Wildlife Corridor, again, is another perfect example of what I'd like to continue to see. There's been so much public upheaval about red tide and the Nestle issue, of Florida, water quality in the state of Florida. I think that politicians are being forced to need to be sure that we're following through. So there's been a lot of great policies that have come up, right, that could potentially do a lot of good. There's a long list of them. But in the end, they get gutted to the point that they're not really doing much of anything. And in a time that we have, the public has such a lack of energy and interest and time itself to care about these issues, we are being called to task to follow through with the efforts that we're putting in, right? And there are some groups who are really standing their grounds. The Florida Toll Roads project that's another great example. That is being shut down left and right, and I'm so glad to see that. Those are my top two for you. This is another thing that I could, I need to reach out to a friend of, the water, another one is the water rights for, the Wekiva area, rights to nature. That was an incredible effort that that's another person that would be really great for you to talk to too. I'll get you his name, and then I'll be more prepared to talk about this with some facts right off the top of my head when we get together again. It's been so long since I've looked at the details of some of those things. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, just give me 1 second here. So, this, kind of discuss, what can be done to improve water quality, right? Really at the local the local level, so individual basis, right? And then regional level and kind of like state level. So, do you think an individual has any potential to improve water quality through maybe their actions, or or do you think this needs to be really managed at a more regional level by tackling kind of these big kind of, polluters, these big kind of agricultural businesses?
That's such a good question. I think one of the best things we can do as individuals is be involved on the local level, because that's where we can really make the most impact. That's not to say that we shouldn't be shouting at the rooftops about certain permits and that sort of thing, but put our energy where it's going to make the most difference, and attending city commission meetings and talking with your representatives, talking to your friends too. Like there's so much that can be done, so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah. So would you kind of, a 2 or 3 minutes of stuff you said kind of became robotic point?
Oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't even hear you saying that you couldn't hear me. Yeah, I don't know how the service is going to be on my drive here. I was hoping that it was going to be good. I'm in Gainesville, but anyhow, yeah, absolutely getting involved on the local level is going to make the most difference, because you can have more personal, connected interactions with your representatives on a local level. That's one of the biggest challenges we face is communicators, or conservationists, is really connecting and getting the point across to these people who are seemingly way off or above us, right? But you really have the opportunity and the chance to connect with them. Try to find common ground with the people that you're interacting with, even if you're just talking with friends who don't necessarily care about conservation yet, or you're talking with a representative. Try to find common ground first. Did I lose you?
For a second, yeah.
Shoot. Man, I'm sorry. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, right now you're crystal clear.
Okay, cool. Did you get most of that though?
Yeah, the vast majority.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. All right. So next question, please.
Absolutely. I'm just looking through my kind of list. So what kind of specific projects have you kind of developed in your career that have kind of helped, these kind of big ideas that we've been discussing?
Gosh, let me come at you with a list. I know I'm about to lose service here in a second too, and let me come up with a list for you whenever we get, when we get back together. Okay.
Of course. Tess, do you want to just stop the interview now, just so?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, keep it more fluid. But yeah, a lot of great information so far. A lot of incredibly eye-opening information, at least for me. So, I think that part 2 is definitely needs to happen 110%.
Cool, awesome, and I'll get some names together for you.
Yeah, I would really do that
for sure, and. Yeah, I think that with the questions that you've given me, I'm kind of seeing the direction that you're going here, and I can do my producer thing and help out.
Yeah, thank you so much. That means a lot, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for chatting, and I'll just shoot me an email and we'll get back together.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a wonderful day. I appreciate it.
You too. Bye.
Bye.